Please join us in welcoming our opening keynote speaker and inducting him into the AME Hall of Fame. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, thank you. You bet. So that's a little bit embarrassing. But I should just simply say, let's see, in the words of that great philosopher Bob Dylan, said, always do for others, but let others do for you. I'm often not so good at that second part. And so I'll just say, with great humility, thank you for that. And I want to also acknowledge AME just a little bit. So all of our friends who brought us here. I've been associated with AME for a while now. A little over 15 years, I think, is when I first was able to join one of these events. It's evolved over the years, and I would join the remarks that Joe and others made about it's a great organization to get involved in, to volunteer. I think everyone benefits more the more that we are each more deeply involved. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit this morning is where we stand just a little bit in the world of manufacturing in North America. I want to do this conversationally as much as I can. It's hard to do with these bright lights shining at me. I can't really see you. Some of you are in another room. But as much as you can, let's just pretend that I'm sitting at your table, and we're talking about the state of things. And unfortunately, because of the way it is, it's me and maybe 2,000 of you, we can't do the give and take that I would like to. Rather than a soliloquy, think of it as a conversation. So where we are with manufacturing is an important thing. It always is, but it seems that for a few years we kind of forgot that. And now that we have decided to return our attention to manufacturing, I think it's a great thing. And the remarks of the premier, I think, illustrate that. So how we got here today and this week, so this is in some of your materials, the materials you've been receiving by email, and then as you received in your packet once you got here. So we're talking about breaking through to the leading edge, and you were invited to come take a walk with us. A lot of this was inspired, I think it was last year or the year before, that our colleague Jim Womack spoke at this event and made some comments, some observations regarding the extended value stream and how we need to focus on the Gemba that led to an inspiration of the planning committee that inspired them to kindly invite the four of us to come speak. That's myself, Dan Jones, who's speaking tomorrow, Jim Womack this afternoon, and Mike Rother on the final day. And we're here really, I want to thank all of AME, Paul and Joe and Michael, and in particular then, this particular idea, I think, came from Dave Hogg and Dan McDonald and all the AME team that helped work to make this possible. It's a privilege for us to be here. So to think about where we are just for a minute, the state of lean. I think everyone here knows and shares this feeling that we're out to change the world. This is, we may try to be, approach our task with a spirit of humility in the face of the challenges that we have, but our ambitions are large. Our ambitions are huge. We want to change the world. We want to make it a better place. That's the feeling that we have, and I'm sure that's the feeling that most of you have as well, hopefully all of you. Lean, we've been making things better through lean thinking and practice for a good 25 or 30 years in North America, depending on when you start counting. The first paper that introduced the word lean production, was published exactly 25 years ago this year. 30 years ago marks the beginning of the experiment that Michael mentioned called NUMMI in Fremont, California, and Michael, I will talk about that just a little bit this morning. Also, the roots of AME go back to around that time. There's another name that we should mention. Our good friend Doc Hall isn't with us. I understand he's recuperating, and I hope we all, send out good feelings and positive thoughts to Doc to get better, and that he can join us the next time we do this. But it was at least 30 years ago or more that Doc and another small group got together and started having meetings and discussions about what they could do to make manufacturing better in North America. So this has those important roots. And I think over time we can look and say that we won some battles. Sometimes in the face of the things that we deal with every day, the crises, the emergencies, the challenges, the problems, it's easy to forget that. But if you go back to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the auto industry in North America is a vastly different industry than it was. There was a huge difference in quality 20 years ago, as the study, The Machine That Changed the World showed, and all of our experience in driving vehicles showed. There was a huge discrepancy in terms of quality or productivity between the North American auto industry and the auto industry, especially in Japan. But nowadays, and I know Ray Tanga is going to be here to speak on the last day, and I don't want to question the ongoing efforts of continuous improvement of my former employer, Toyota. But if you go out now and buy a Camry versus an Accord versus a Fusion versus a Malibu versus a Passat, I don't know. I can't tell the difference anymore. There's a fashion difference, okay, in terms of what you want to drive. But in terms of quality, the difference is almost gone. And that's amazing, I think, if we think back and put ourselves in that position of 20 years ago, to think that the changes would have occurred that have, I think are surprising. And then it's spread to other sectors. Dan is going to talk about healthcare tomorrow, and the boom that's taken place in terms of applying these practices and principles in healthcare, again, are absolutely surprising. 10 years ago, I certainly would not have predicted that. And 5 years ago, would not have predicted that it's having as much success as it is. And then there are many new frontiers. And I think the Premier challenged us earlier to think about what some of those are, and there's much, much more yet to be done. So we have this word that has been used a lot in the last couple of years called reshoring. And at the Lean Institute, Lean Enterprise Institute, we like to think of that a little bit differently. There was a boom in outsourcing that started a long time ago. And now we see a lot of insourcing occurring, where people realize that, hey, I'm taking money out of my wallet to give to someone else for something that I could possibly do myself. So vertical integration became out of fashion for a long time, and now people are looking a lot at that again. More to the point, offshoring. About 20 years ago, this huge boom in offshoring began. And now we see a lot of reshoring. But the point really is not that everything is going to come back to North America. There are a lot of things that are absolutely, legitimately made in various parts of the world. Global trade is a good thing, a very good thing, and we all benefit from that. But the question is, where's the right place for this particular product to be made, this activity to occur? And the single-minded, narrow-minded focus on lowest piece price that started about 20 years ago led us to make a lot of decisions that simply were not rational. So you see a lot of things now coming back here, but the point is deciding where is the right place. The right shoring is a better term. And as we change the location of things, the location isn't necessarily the main point. The thing is to make sure that as we bring manufacturing operations back, that we bring them back in the right way. So not the same broken operations that we offshored 20 years ago, but make sure that they're lean, that they embody the principles of making things better. So that can take us from a view of total lean value streams, from total lean value streams from the way we were looking at things before. So I apologize for this slide, a lot of words on it. But from analyzing the value chain as a series of discrete transactions, which is what we were doing 20 years ago when we made these decisions, to recognizing the value stream as a series of tight connections, each representing a relationship with potential for learning and improvement in that connection itself, So then we can exploit value streams with this understanding, and that'll enable effectiveness and efficiency with great adaptability throughout the entire value stream, throughout the entire enterprise. So we can get from optimizing discrete transaction points to creating value streams as adaptive learning systems themselves. And here's an example of one. The Premier, I think, had to leave, but I was going to praise some of the efforts of one of the services provided here in the province of Ontario. This was in the news just this past week. So whenever I appear and have the chance to meet a group like this, I always try to look at what's going on with lean locally right now. And the news just this past week, I got this off of the internet. It was in a local newspaper. I'm not sure if it was the Globe and Mail. But there was a drug ring that was caught by the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, and the Quebec Police. That was especially challenging. It was vexing to the police to be able to crack this case because the drug ring was using just in time. So on the one hand, it's kind of good to see these principles and practices making it out into the world, but it challenges all of us to keep up. And so the police actually had to study and understand. These are the words from the police. The police said that the ring used just-in-time supply model. And if you look down in the lower corner there, you can see a milk run going on. So what happened is there was no warehouse, a place where the drugs were being kept. They were always on the move, so that was especially challenging to the police. So manufacturing's next chapter, and how that relates to GE Appliances. I have with me today a colleague, a friend from GE Appliances in Louisville, Kentucky, Rich Calvaruso. And I believe it really is an important activity, an important initiative, and that the story of GE Appliances, in a way, is a concluding chapter of the story of North American manufacturing of the past 50 or 60 years, where we've seen things start from a high point to dissipate and then come back. And the story of GE Appliances could be the story of the future of North American manufacturing. So there are a lot of questions that come when we look at manufacturing and bringing manufacturing back. So what happens when we decide to reshore offshore operations? I'm reminded again of the Premier's words. She told us that there are a lot of jobs here in Ontario, but we don't necessarily have the skills, the skilled workforce to be able to supply, to fulfill the needs of those jobs. So what happens when we decide to reshore? Sounds really good on the surface. When operations go far away, what happens is that capabilities go with them. So there's the question of how does an organization even identify and then go about acquiring the needed skills? When manufacturing operations go away, a lot happens. A lot can be lost. It's not just the discrete operation. The value stream is a living thing. And so when we decide to ship things around the world, including our operations, we change our very character, we change our very nature. So let's look back a little bit in history. Here we are in 2013. It was 100 years ago that flow production was coming to life, the hands of Henry Ford and his team in Highland Park, Michigan. Highland Park is kind of a community inside Detroit. And this is an aerial photograph of that very famous and very important factory where flow production was coming together. And particularly, the first assembly lines were done there. Probably the first car assembly line was 1914, but there were assembly lines of parts, components, that were done in 1913. Here's the earliest known photograph, the first moving assembly line, the caption says. If you look at this version, you can probably see that it's being pushed along by the workers. And sometime after this, it was motorized. It became a moving conveyor. Exactly when that was, I'm not exactly sure. But Henry Ford saw the supply chain as one giant conveyor running through the entire company, very, very famously. And here's a photo of that factory taken just a couple of years ago from the back side of Ford Highland Park. You can see it's kind of falling down just a little bit. There's another important factory that I think many of us know about, Ford's River Rouge plant, also in the outskirts of Detroit. And here's where Henry Ford was realizing one of his visions to have a giant conveyor all the way from ore to assembly, another aerial photograph there, where he would bring in raw materials, process them, and a car would come out the other end. He had 15 million square feet, 100,000 workers, 100 miles of railroad track inside the site, 15 miles of roads, and, of course, lots of conveyors. 120 miles worth of conveyors and 6,000 suppliers. Just an amazing, amazing factory. And I show these photos partly because I love factories. And this whole issue of reshoring and remanufacturing, bringing manufacturing back, as you drive around North America, you see a lot of empty factories. I lived in Detroit for 20 years. I now live in New England. And I love these old places. You know, they're just bricks and mortar in a way, but you know, a factory is more than that. You know, I mean, a lot. How many people here, and you can do this in the other room as well, actually spend or have spent a lot of your time in factories? Could you just kind of show, if you raise your hand, others can see who you are. I'm looking around, and at least over half the hands are going up. But factories are living things. They have a mind of their own. They're bricks and mortar, yes, but that's where human spirit is both developed and is captured inside those walls. In the case of the Rouge plant in Henry Ford's vision, he wanted that conveyor to extend not only through the plant, through the country, through North America, and all the way around the world. So he ended up rebuilding pretty much a replica of the Rouge down in Brazil, in the Amazon. And there's a book about that called Fordlandia that you can read, which is amazing, just an amazing story of what he was trying to do, the vision that he had. But you know, as it turns out, you know, the world changes, the customer's demand changes. We have to be adaptive as we build robust systems. And he wasn't able to do that, and what happened in about 1932 was the Rouge started getting just simply choked by complexity, I think. Here you see a moving conveyor line that has a lot of different parts, different engines on it. You see a V8 block there and a straight engine block as well. Choked by complexity. Managing all that, turns out, requires a lot of attention and detail. And here's another, I think, important factory. It's the one that Michael mentioned earlier. This is NUMMI. It was a former General Motors facility. There you can see it in the foothills of the mountains there in southeast corner of San Francisco Bay. That's an old photograph of an old newspaper article that says, "The old GM plant is reborn with the NUMMI startup." Built its first car December 1984, its last in April 2010. And I think NUMMI kick-started a revolution that continues that we're all a part of. I happened to have been there on both those occasions a week before the final car was actually built in 2010. And it is an amazing story. I do invite those of you who have not had a chance to learn about it to do so. But there was agreement between Toyota and General Motors, the biggest car companies in North America and Japan. And the agreement was that Toyota would manage the plant. And a reason was so General Motors would be able to learn that system. The plant that was chosen, as it turns out, was GM's worst plant, their certified worst plant. And that's not exactly a motivating thing, is it, to be part of the certified worst plant? And it was certified worst in a couple of ways. One, in terms of quality, because General Motors would do a quarterly quality audit, and this plant was always at the very bottom of all its work sites around the world. Certified worst. And the workforce. The workforce was so bad, even the union said they couldn't work with those people. They wouldn't follow the union's own rules. The certified worst workforce in the world. And it was those workers that were offered their jobs back, and there they are. Here they are right here. This is June 4th, 1984. And these were the former workers of the GM plant. These are UAW people, all of them, who are now going to be working in the new plant that was going to be managed in a very, very different way. The same people. What was happening with those folks? You did some classroom training. A lot of OJT, or on-the-job development, is the word that we like to use. The Toyota production system was indeed established, and that included both the technical elements, right, the physical things, the product, plant layout, but also the soft technologies, the management, the people systems. And always remembering that soft doesn't mean easy. So it had both of those things going on, the physical and the technical dimensions. And the results were, in just 1 year, to get to the punchline quickly here today, which is the quality went from the worst in the GM system to setting a record for the very best quality score any GM plant had ever gotten. That's pretty amazing in 1 year with the same workers. And the quality was as good as the Corolla plant in Japan. And the productivity was the best in GM and close to that of the Corolla plant in Japan. So pretty amazing turnaround in just 1 year. So if you do want to learn a little bit more about this, there are a couple of places you can go. And Michael mentioned one. We do have at the LEI booth, wherever that is, some copies of that article. There's a slow management review. But I also wanted to invite you to listen to the National Public Radio show, This American Life. They did a special on NUMMI a couple of years ago, 1 hour special. It tells some amazing stories of what happened before in that factory, before the joint venture, and then what happened after. And I think a lot of those lessons still inform how we think about our challenges here today. Now, here's another factory, and you can see NUMMI there in the lower right-hand corner, because I like to show that because it's the same mountains behind it. It's just about 10 miles away, the Ford Milpitas, California plant. And in fact, no one thinks about it, but about 10 or 15% of the workforce at NUMMI was actually from this Ford Milpitas plant. So they should get some of the credit, I guess, for the turnaround. Just down the road, just down the road. But here's the Ford Milpitas plant today. It's a mall. It's been converted into a shopping mall. The great mall in Milpitas, California. Here's Highland Park today. It's a strip mall called the Model T Plaza. Again, it's just bricks and mortar in a way, you know, but in a way, to me, they're more than that. The Rouge, on the other hand, we received a tremendous investment from Ford, and it was reborn. You'll find a great example of environmentally friendly, sustainable building and facilities, which kind of brings me up to another important factory, GE Appliance Park in Louisville, Kentucky. Was born 60 years ago this year. And here's an aerial photograph. Again, I love old factories. It's just kind of can't help it. And here's where a grand experiment is taking place. I think see very much in the tradition of what happened at NUMMI. I think there's a connection here. And here's where we have this experiment of from reshoring to right-shoring. Now GE decided this is where these products need to be made, is right here. And as they decided to make them here, again, in Louisville, Kentucky, to do it in the right way. Not just bringing back old processes, but put in a lean operating system. So GE Appliances is about a $5 billion global business, headquartered there in Louisville. They have operations in a lot of places. I think they have about 5,000 or so jobs there in Louisville now, and they've added about 1,500 or so since this project started. And it started with a model line, which is a nice tried and true means of going about getting your lean transformation to occur. You have to have some place where you can really try all these things out as a system where it goes very deep. So the model line concept. And that's how they started there in Appliance Park in the spring of 2009, where they began making a product that they were already making and put in now a flow line, a lean line, and said, will this work or not? And that experiment told them that it will work, and not just because it feels like the right thing to do to have jobs in Louisville again, but because it can make good business sense. We can actually be successful as a business. And so as the CFO who's quoted here, who simply asked, well, can we do this for all our products? If the answer is yes, well, then let's do them here. And that's what the team there decided to do. And they've done a number of things over the last couple of years, including what they call the big room process. Now, many of you know this, and many of us use the Japanese word for it, the obeya, which just means big room. They came up with this big room process that begins with a cross-functional team, all the different functions together, make all the work as visible as you can, make the work visual, do some teardowns, do some benchmarking, understand your product and your competitors' products, come up with different ways, or in this case, 7 ways that the product might actually be put together, do some mock-ups, both the product and the production system for the production preparation, then finally production. So this is what they, again, began just a few years ago. There's a great article about this in the Atlantic Monthly, or the Atlantic magazine, written by Charles Fishman. It came out last December. And he made a number of observations in this article that I think really bring to life what has been going on there. One is that is the story of the disappearing screws. So what happens on the factory floor is important, but what you're going to make is also important. One of the things that's not discussed about NUMMI so much, Michael, really, is that plant floor changes are fairly well known, and you can listen to the NPR article and read the article in Sloan. But also the product was a completely different product. So in this case, that's where GE Appliances began. Marketing said, we want a sleek look with no visible screws. This is what our customers are telling us that they want. And in fact, production is also saying that shooting screws is a lot of work. we don't want them either. And so designers came up with a nice, simple, elegant solution, which is one hidden screw with a rod that would accomplish the same purpose. So that's essentially just value engineering, I think, if not invented, developed at GE back in the day. And here are the words of Charles Fishman in The Atlantic. I think it's a great set of words, so I'll just read them if you don't mind. But if the people who design dishwashers sit at their desk in one building and the people who sell them sit in another building, and the people who make them are in another country and speak a different language, you never realize that the screws should even disappear, let alone come up with a way that they can. So that starts to capture, I think, some of the spirit of why we want to think about how we configure our systems on a global scale. So Fishman also suggests that the assembly line, as we all know, is a way of putting parts together. That's easy enough. We all know that. But lean production, then, is a way of putting the assembly line itself together, so the work is as easy and efficient as possible. Isn't that a nice, elegant way of capturing at least part of what lean production is about, right? We're working at different levels, at fractals. Kind of takes me back just for a minute to think about the old GM Fremont before the joint venture. Here's some photographs from the Fremont plant. And just take a look there and see what it tells you. You can see in the bottom there where it says General Motors Assembly Plant. First time I visited there, the shadow of those letters were still on the wall. NUMMI didn't have a name yet. But look, if you look at the cars in the inspection area there, I don't know if that's an inspection area or maybe a repair bay, I don't know. But looking at the cars, I can see that that's 1964. I think a lot of the older folks here could also see that's 1964. And you'll see there a Pontiac and a Chevrolet and an Oldsmobile and a Buick. You'll see two-door hardtops and four-door sedans. And behind there, you can't see it so well probably from where you are, but there's a station wagon you can also see. Now, each one of these has its own powertrains, right? You can't have an Oldsmobile engine in a Pontiac. In fact, GM tried that in the 80s and got in a lot of trouble. And each one has its own transmission, and each one had various options of what size of powertrain to have in the vehicle. Can you imagine the complexity of this? And for consumers, there was no limit to how the combinations that you could order. You pull out a list of the different options, you could configure it any way you wanted. So this is what the workers, like the fellow that we see here underneath the car, was dealing with as he looks like he's tightening up a tie rod there. Looks like he's tightening up a tie rod. Now, if you go back to that NPR article, the NPR radio show, you'll hear a story there. And how many of you have actually heard the NPR radio show? A few hands going up, maybe 10%. It's 1 hour, it really is amazing. This American Life is the name of the show. It's usually a 10-minute show, and they did a whole special 1 hour on this. But one of the stories that stands out is the story of what happened with a loose tie rod. That one day in inspection, they found a car that had a tie rod that was loose. It was so loose, as it drove away, within a few miles, it was going to fall off. Someone was going to die. Someone was going to die. So then they checked, and they found 200 cars with the exact same loose bolt with tie rod. What had happened was an unhappy worker had intentionally left these bolts or made these bolts loose. This was a workforce, in fact, that would intentionally sabotage quality. And everyone here knows that a lean production system starts with building in quality. We're going to build quality in right here, right now. So this workforce not only would not do that, they would intentionally sabotage quality. Go on and on with stories of the old days. But as I think of that and think of this photo, I'd like to ask you to also think about this photo just for a minute and how it relates to that story. So if you think of, as Fishman tells us, that the production system as science, as something to improve, just like an individual job, that starts to give us a challenge, but one that I find very energizing. So if the production system is a science, it's something to improve, it's something that has to occur at every level. I think this is one of the lessons that we've all collectively learned over the years. At the macro enterprise system level, at the value stream level, at the factory level, and at the level of each individual job. At the level of each individual job. So here you'll see a photo. This shows Rich Calvaruso and his colleague Bill McDonough. Rich is from operations, wants to make refrigerators. Bill is from human resources. They're working together as a team to design the lean production and the lean people systems together. What you see on the wall there is a design, a picture of the production system, how we want this plant to work. We don't want things to just come together haphazardly, like probably the old GM Fremont plant. We want to design this. How should this thing work? So they went through a physical plant transformation, just as many of you have either done or seen many times in the past. completely gutted and refurbished the old buildings there in Louisville. And I'll say, Rich, if you don't mind, so before this gutting and refurbishing, it was pretty bad. It's among the worst that I've seen in a long, long time. I won't tell you exactly how long, but probably 20 years. Because what they had done there in that facility is outsourced. What they knew how to do, even the engineers, the managers, was how to send things overseas. The idea, now we're going to actually build and invest here, was new to them. They hadn't done that. And you could see that when you walked around. You could see that when you walked around. You could feel it. The workers could feel it too. So in addition to a physical plant transformation, that's only half the story, they also recognized, to their credit, that they needed a social plant transformation as well. So how do we decide what kind of social transformation we need? They put together a cross-functional team. Had people from sourcing, people from operations, people from the union. It is a union operation as well. And gave them a couple of months. Rich, was it 2 or 3 months? It was around 3 months. And they went to see some things. Went to see Autoleaf. Went to see, spent some time at Herman Miller. They also took a deep dive look at NUMMI, recognizing that NUMMI could be roughly the kind of model that might fit in terms of scale, in terms of being a union operation, in terms of the transformation that they were going to have to, that they needed. So whereas the big rooms that were working on the product and production development were called big rooms, they said, okay, this is a little big room. And this was commissioned by the head of operations, who was someone with kind of a dominating, strong personality, as a lot of people in operations are, right? And he was smart enough to recognize that he shouldn't be a part of it. In fact, he said that he forbade himself to visit them for the first couple of months. He wanted them to go out and find out what is the right optimal design for our social system and our new plan. And this is what they came up with. And what you'll find here is nothing that we haven't seen plenty of times before, right? You see the teams and team leader up at the top. You're going to have a reasonable number of people on each team, supported by a team leader who's supported by then what they call an area business leader, what Toyota would have called a group leader, and then supported by a business leader and all the other support operations then feeding it in as well. They said, this is kind of what we need to see happen. This is the social design that we think will fit the production system that we put in place to fit the new products that were designed. So what they ended up with were improved jobs, and jobs that were designed for further improvement. You probably can't tell a lot of what is going on in this particular photograph, but one of the things that's really a simple and novel way of being able to show normal from abnormal, ahead or behind, is you'll see along the assembly line there, they're putting together doors to go on refrigerators, and you'll see tape has been placed there, red tape and green tape, and that shows the pitch of one job. And of course, in automotive plants, we have the pitch and we have hash marks, and everyone has seen how these work. So the technical innovation here is not so great, but the way it was done socially was genius, and that it was a casual way to have the team then start to understand that they can understand ahead or behind, plan versus actual, normal versus abnormal in their area. And they can start to control then and have an understanding of their own jobs. A lot of learning and teaching jobs via the old training within industry methodologies, which there are a lot of people here who are very familiar with that, people who teach that. I don't know, Patrick and Bob are here, I'm sure, and others. So this is not new. Of course, this came from the United States to Japan back in 1950. Toyota and Nissan and others brought it back here, and now we're experiencing a great revival, and this is what's being used to introduce job design and job improvement to the workforce there in Louisville, in Appliance Park. So doing jobs, improving jobs via the TWI method, so that people who are doing them understand them, can make them better, and that leading to a situation where you have great care for the design of each job. Great care for the design of each job. We want to make it simple, easy to do right, hard to do wrong, and make it easy to spot problems. Easy to do right, hard to do wrong, easy to spot problems, and easy to do PDCA. Then, support to solve problems. skill building for continuous improvement, and a structured support for PDCA. None of these are revolutionary in their individual piece of the overall puzzle, but how we bring them to bear on the actual situation that we're working on becomes the critical success factor in being successful in this case or not. Because errors will happen. Now, I don't know how many of you may have seen this. This was from I think it was New York Times article in this past week, where the former CEO of a hospital that we're good friends with in Boston, Beth Israel Hospital. Hi, Alice. Alice is here. Especially had an experience a few years ago of a patient waking up and finding out after her surgery was over that the wrong leg had been operated on. Now, that may sound horrible, and it is, but you might like to know that here in North America, I'm pretty sure Canada and the U.S. don't have any difference in this rate, although Dan Jones, you may have fixed the NHS by now. But this happens something like 2 or 3 times a day. Now, can you imagine anything worse than a wrong side surgery? Because once the wrong one's been operated on, you still have to go back in and operate on the other one. And this happens. It happens in North America 2 or 3 times a day. So problems happen, and then the question is always going to be, then what do we do with those? Do we make it easy to see them? Do we make it hard to do them wrong? Do we then develop the kind of mentality and a structure so that people doing the work can be able to handle their task with some confidence? In other words, do we learn from them? Do we learn from them? So problems happen. How do we learn from them, recognizing that that's what we want to do? Well, we're going to suggest here there might be kind of 4 levels of that, really. We have reactive troubleshooting and firefighting. And we've all dealt with that, and that's a lot of us spend a lot of our days sometimes doing that. That we know we want to switch over to more reflexive root cause problem solving. This is where the 5 whys comes in. Why did the machine break down? Why did the operator make an error? And from there, and you'll hear about this, I'm pretty sure, later this week on Thursday from Mike Rother, we want to take that to another step, a proactive target condition experimenting. Where do we need to go? How can we take the same discipline that we put into our usual backwards-looking 5 whys into reaching a target condition? And then ultimately to then open innovation, exploring best possible conditions so that we don't even need the same sort of reactive problem solving. And I showed this slide earlier, and I showed the arrows just pointing in one direction, top down. But actually, it can also flow bottom up, and actually it really should flow in both directions. You want this alignment, we need to make sure that we're working on all levels, not just one. The macro enterprise system level. And I think that this will be part of what Jim Womack talks about with Ingersoll Rand this afternoon. The enterprise level and the value stream level. We need to be working at those levels. We also need to be working at one level down, the factory level as well. And Dan Jones, I think the hospital in a way is a factory, and I think Dan's going to show us how the value stream level and the factory level, the hospital also need to come together in terms of us making breakthrough innovations. And then it always has to come and be realized, be actualized at the level of each individual job. No matter what great work we do at the high level, if it doesn't change the work of a value-creating person, it's not going to matter. We're not going to get the benefits from it. On the other hand, if we just work at the level of the individual worker, no matter what great work that person does, remember the worker there at GM Fremont trying to put the tie rod on? No matter how much we might improve that, if it's part of a broken overall system, it's also really not going to matter. So we have to work all levels of this. So if I think about GM Fremont and what production and people systems were in place, I remember that worker. It's a coincidence that the photo that I found here is a worker, looks like probably attaching a tie rod. So I don't know who this person is. It looks like a 1964 Oldsmobile Cutlass. I know Rich Calvarusso's father worked at GM's Lordstown plant doing the same kind of work. But when I see that, what strikes me is that a worker doing this job a few years later intentionally sabotaged quality. If I look at this worker, does he look like a bad guy? No, he's somebody's father. It could have been mine, right? He's not a bad guy. People sometimes ask, what did you really do at NUMMI that made a difference? And in a way, we told people, you know, you don't have to stink. Nobody goes to work in the morning and says, hey, I'm going to stink up the place. People want to do a good job. It's up to us then, to make sure that we create the conditions whereby they can do that. That means developing them and their problem-solving capability, their continuous improvement capability, but also putting in the overall system so that as they do that good work, it's actually going to make a difference. It's going to matter. So what production and people systems were in place there at GM in 1964, or 10 years later in 1974? Because in 1984, it wasn't even there anymore at all. The plant had been shut down. So was there even an aligned business purpose that was part of the overall system that was in place then at that time? It's thinking about those things that has led us to kind of put together what we call sort of a lean transformation model. I'm just sharing this to share with you some of our thoughts as we start to recognize that we need to work at all levels of this to make effective change. How can we have a model that can ensure that we're thinking at all levels and working at all levels when we're trying to improve our own companies or when we're trying to help others improve themselves? So what you see here is kind of a transformation model. It looks very much like the old Toyota production system house, the TPS house, which I imagine everyone here is familiar with. But it's slightly different. Slightly different. It's organized to show the areas that we need to make sure that we don't miss when we go about our transformation. We think that any transformation is going to have to begin with a situational approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all. A lot of consultants, I used to be a consultant, nothing wrong with nothing against consultants. When I had a real job 20 years ago, I hated consultants. Then I was a consultant. Now with the Lean Institute, we're not-for-profit, and we can kind of step back and look at the situation to understand it. And you realize that there's not one solution you can sell that you can try to give to every situation. It's going to be situational. Defined essentially by asking, what problem are we trying to solve? What problem is it that we're trying to solve here and now? Now, that could be at that macro level we talked about. We want to improve our appliance market share and sales, and provide better service here in North America. At that level, it can be at the level of how can I put on this tie rod without keeping my hands, without hurting myself, carpal tunnel, doing the job all day long. What's the value here? Then it's got to have a process improvement component. What are we doing to actually change the work? Not talk about changing the work, right? Not put in a structure so the work can be changed, but what are we doing to really change the work of the value-creating worker, the person doing that value creation? Then we can think about, okay, what is the capability development that is required, and what are we doing to ensure that that is actually taking place as well? Developing for the right kind of sustainable improvement capability in all people at all levels. Then we can define, based on that, what kind of leadership is required to bring that about. If I want people to expose problems, so we're having fewer wrong-side surgeries, so we're having fewer workers loosening tie rod bolts, okay? What kind of leadership is required to do that? So now, moving away from command and control to something different isn't just an abstract idea of appearing in a leadership book somewhere. It's a very practical, real thing. And all of that, then, needs to rest on some foundation of how and why we think things work, how we think things. What is our assumption, what is our belief that underlies the transformation that we're bringing to bear? Is that we want to maximize profits short term? I can't say that that's wrong, but that's going to have certain implications. Versus deciding, I want a sustainable system here that's going to be adaptive for the long term. And if we think about having a sustainable system that's adaptive for the long term, we'll probably end up with fewer of those empty factories that are falling apart that dot the North American landscape. So what's the basic thinking, the mindset, the assumptions that underlies this? Here are some questions that could go along with that. Always ask, what's the purpose or what problem are we trying to solve? Macro level, micro level. How are we improving the actual work? Could be a software engineer writing code. How do we improve that? How are we building capability so people know how to work within the system that they're now spending their days? What role should leadership take, and how does the management system support that way of working? And then what basic philosophy or thinking underlies and is driving this entire transformation? That becomes a way that we can kind of just keep ourselves in check so we don't forget that we need to eventually work on all those levels. It doesn't mean we start at all of them at once. Right? The problem we're trying to solve may drive us to one of those, and we may spend quite a long time on that one before we go to the next. But eventually, we're going to have to work in all levels. And eventually, we're going to have to realize that no matter which one we work at, it's going to drive us to the Gemba, the place where the value-creating work is occurring. Gemba is a word that means kind of really empiricism. What are the real facts? Not abstract, not guesswork, what's really happening. And it's a Japanese word, but it's not a Japanese concept. George Everett Evans is a folklorist, Welsh folklorist from the 20th century, who said, if you want to know about something, you ask the people who know, the collier, the countryman. You ask the fellows who cut the hay. You don't ask the people who think they know about cutting the hay. You ask the people who cut the hay. So how we got here and how this ties into, I think, what we want to try to learn together over these next few days. What ties Jim and Dan and Mike and myself together. There were some books that Michael mentioned that kind of go back a number of years now. Machine That Changed the World, Jim and Dan Roos wrote over 20 years ago. Then a few years later, Lean Thinking, which pulled together a set of ideas and made it possible for us to work with a common language. Then Mike and I working with Jim and Dan, learning to see, and Jim and Dan then seeing the whole value stream of how this extends throughout the extended enterprise, which again I think starts to put us together in terms of what we're trying to work on here this week. So I think what you see with these additional ones, Jim's new edition of Gemba Walks, there's a book that Dan published and wrote the foreword called Making Hospitals Work that I think will underlie a lot of what Dan will talk about tomorrow. Managing to Learn, which the book that we debuted, launched here in Toronto 5 years ago. And then Mike's work on Toyota Kata, which he introduced a couple of years after that. I think what ties these together ties together the notion of how we can, in a holistic fashion, in integrated fashion, work with organizations to make complete sustainable change. So that ultimately, we're creating places of work that are fulfilling for people day to day and that hold their value and provide value on a continuing basis for society over time. Now, here you'll see that same photograph again of NUMMI. And now NUMMI is the home of Tesla. So the same bricks and mortar, which don't matter, were home to the old GM Fremont plant, where workers were intentionally sabotaging quality, fighting with a system that had incredible complexity, to the revolution that happened with NUMMI, to now next level innovation, working in different ways. And I think that's what we want to see, regardless of the bricks and mortar, that everyone involved in all of our business systems is learning to make their situation better every day, and that's going to make things better for the companies and for the societies that we work in. So finally, I'd just like to say again, thanks for letting us be here. I look forward to working with you the rest of the week. We all still have a lot to learn and a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.